Well, thanks everyone for coming out. So this is something that we do once a month, Coaches Coffee, and it's an event. It's hosted by United Soccer Coaches, and they brought the coffee. Thank you, Jordan. And so basically, it's a kind of a coaching, collaboration, education thing we do once a month to kind of talk about different topics. And obviously, this is a very important topic. And so one of the interesting things about it is we cover a whole different range of topics, so coaches can learn all different things. So thanks for coming this morning. So the topic this morning is mental health and student athletes. And our presenters are Dr. Sullivant and Angie, I'm sorry, your last name? Vanderpool. And nurse practitioner, right? And so what we're going to talk about today, when Janet and I were having a conversation about this session, one of the things that came up that I think a lot of people are interested in, parents and coaches, is what happens when an athlete gets injured, what that does to their emotional state, how they interact with their family and their coaches and team. So that's the topic for the day, and a little bit, I guess, a little more background. It sounds like, from talking to Janet, the way this all started was the sports medicine department noticed that there were students who were injured and then struggled with kind of some psyche, some mental or emotional issues. And so then they started working with Dr. Sullivan and the psychology area to kind of collaborate. And then I'll let you talk a little more about it, but she mentioned there was like a screening that they do. So I'll let you talk about those details. So thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. And then, so the way this works, usually we do about 30-40 minutes of presentation, and then usually end kind of break or questions. We get questions, maybe let and then afterwards people kind of hang around to, ask them questions or have sidebars or these things.
Thank you guys for coming. I just wanted to ask, first of all, are you guys mostly soccer coaches, people here that are coaches? Everybody? Yeah? Okay. All right. Not necessarily everybody, I see.
From club or what level? All club.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm kicking myself that I don't have my David Beckham picture up on this slide because I have a lot of different sports athletes up there, but we really appreciate your time today. I think that one of the things I've learned in my work is that I'm really limited, and I'm going to reach a really limited number of young people in our community in my work as a psychiatrist. Because most kids don't reach me. Most kids do not end up coming to see a mental health care provider, and most kids that die by suicide, or many of them in our community, never get someone like me. But they do come in for medical care, and so that's one thing Angie can really speak to you guys about is what are the ways that we can notice the signs and the symptoms where we can try to catch kids earlier, because they don't come in with a sign on their forehead that tells us they're at risk, but there are things we can do to try to catch them early and make them to help.
So we started this because a few years back we knew that a lot of our kids, when they were doing ACL surgery and recovery, they were isolated from their peers. And once you start isolating a child from their peers, they get depressed, they get withdrawn, they start hanging out in the room all the time, and it's just harder to get them to communicate. Several of those kids we had referred and encouraged to go places. Sometimes it fell on fertile soil and sometimes it didn't. And we ended up with one young lady who we had recommended talking with someone several times and ended up committing suicide. So we decided we needed to be a little bit more proactive and see what else we could do to better identify our population and try and push people to get help. So we started, that's when we reached out, talked to Dr. Sullivant, and they were doing a pilot in the hospital for suicide screening. So we said we want to be part of this pilot. And so we started off with the sports medicine crew and identified a few the different locations, and then we've now spread it throughout our entire program. Every student that comes in, every child that comes in between the age of 12 and the time they're done with us, it gets the standard screening every visit. And it's made a huge difference. We get positives all the time. And it gives us a chance then to get a social worker involved who then screens them and determines if they need something done urgently or if we just need to get them with someone in the community. Most importantly, and I think, is the fact that the families who were very leery of this at first have come back and been very positive that it started conversations. It gave them an avenue, whether the child asked or whether the parent said, so what did they put you in a room to talk about? Either way, it made them ask a question. And so that was one of the things that we found was very important. And as we've been doing this, Oh, there you go. We wanted to look at all the risk factors in youth. These are what our objectives are. Discuss ways to screen for suicidal thoughts, which we're going to get into. And the more we looked at it, the more prevalence we found in sports. You hear a few, but when I started going back and looking, different athletes have been coming out since the 60s that they have mental health issues or that they've had anxiety, depression. And the prevalence between major names, as well as almost every sport, swimming, golf, pretty much anything. And then,
We just keep going.
you have actors, actresses. It's becoming more common for people to actually speak, come out and talk about it. But also in the readings, there's a lot of people that are afraid to say anything because they don't know how much that's going to impact the chance of a scholarship. So if you say too much.
I was just gonna, I'm sorry, there's a really well-known athlete, there's a website called Players Tribune, where athletes can share their side of sports. And I think he just published a big article about mental health. Yeah, because he struggled with it. And so I think it's a great example of people that aren't aware of these things that go on, but
You don't even think about it.
Right.
But there's more out there than you realize. And once the athletes start connecting, then hopefully they'll get more help. Or they realize that they're not in the isolated instance. So in athletes, there's an expectation of being strong. You don't want to show emotion. You don't want to show that you're weak in any way. And mental health is viewed in our society as a weakness. So your athletes want to be leaders. That's what they're trained to be. That's our goal. And you're supposed to play through the pain, whether it's mental or whether it's physical. And they also have some increased stressors that others don't, and that would be injuries, family expectations of college, possibly a future in the sport. It's going to pay for their college, all of those things besides the standard developmental stuff that adolescents are working through, which is becoming an adult, and it's really overwhelming to them. Potential illnesses, I mean, there's diagnosed illnesses in some of these kids going into sports or as they graduate, and that's depression, severe anxiety, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive, borderline. Those are true illnesses. And if we don't recognize them and make sure that they're being taken care of as they play their sport, again, the number of famous people you know or big athletes that are coming out is pretty impressive. Amani Boye is the one playing basketball. She said that she tried to commit suicide the first time at 10 years old. We're doing screening from 12 up. It makes me think we need to go back a few years more. But that was because she had abuse in her background, but basketball was her escape, and that was how she played to get through. But it was still time where she struggled, and she tried to commit suicide 2 other times, but she's now a professional basketball player. So she got through it. It's still a struggle.
do you see a lot of, in cases, is it the fact that the athlete already has some underlying things going on that come out, or sometimes does the actual sport itself start the issue? Or is it
I think during the injury is when we've seen it the most. They're kids that were doing pretty well. They may have had their typical adolescent stressors up and down, but then when they're isolated from their peers, whether a concussion, I found even with my own kids that if they're not actually playing out with the team, if they're off for a few weeks for anything, kids don't text each other as much. They don't reach out to the one that's not there. Instead, they're talking about what went on at today's practice. And so that little bit of a distance just kind of grows. And so the longer they're out of a sport or out of their normal activities. And it's also the whole family that's isolated. Because you spend so much time with those families that if the parents aren't there with the kids, then it changes the whole family dynamics.
That's interesting because we had a game where a player was hurt and him and his mother came to watch us out. Why not? So my wife was like, there's no way I'm going all the way to find out to watch that.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting that maybe it's worth it because it keeps them involved and it keeps them.
I encourage my patients. So I had one earlier this week, he broke his hand and he's in a cast, and this kid needs exercise. Like, it helps him stay stable, right? And now he's out of wrestling and he's going to be out of baseball. And I said, so are you thinking of helping manage the team? Or are you going to be going? And his mom was like, well, I don't want his coach to forget about him. And I was like, yeah, and you don't want to not have time with your peers. Having that structure in your day is really important. The other thing I was just going to mention is that people that have a genetic predisposition to mental health problems are also going to be at higher risk in these situations. And so it could be that there's a family history there, and then you have this life stressor, and so you're at increased risk. Or kids that maybe had a history, they were struggling with depression, they were getting better, but then they have this life stressor. So, yeah. I just added more athletes here because I also think there are a lot of preconceived ideas. So I work in our eating disorder center. I see a lot of people that come in, particularly athletes that went for years undiagnosed with their eating disorder. And I just want to point out that like we've got Gracie Gold in the middle, right, who did not go to the Olympics this year because of treatment for anorexia and depression. But that's kind of the stereotype you think of, right? And we do know we see higher risk of eating disorders for people that are involved in a sport where the way your body looks when you perform the sport is a big piece of how you're judged. But it's not just that. So we've got Joey Julius up in the upper left-hand corner, a Penn State kicker, who went to McAllen Place in St. Louis for treatment for his binge eating disorder and depression repeatedly. And he talked about how being in the spotlight and having the media repeatedly talk about how he didn't have a typical body for a kicker was really, really hard for him and it increased some of the challenges that he faced. We've got Simone Biles up there, who everyone knows has been very successful. When her medical records were leaked, of course I kind of felt sorry for her, that's not appropriate. But I was really impressed by how she just said, yes, I have ADHD, I've been treated for it for years, it's really helped me to have medication. So I think it's really important when you're working with an athlete who needs help to acknowledge and normalize it for them. And I think Michael Phelps does that better than most athletes, right? Parents in particular, tend to think of the worst case scenario. They think of the person that died by suicide when you tell them, hey, your daughter told me she's having these thoughts. What we need to think about is people like Michael Phelps, who after the 2012 Olympics crashed, right? He was depressed, he was suicidal, he was drinking heavily, he got into treatment, he recovered, and what happened to Rio? Like, he took Rio, right? Like, he owned it. And then we've got Allison Schmidt over here, his friend, and also an Olympic swimmer who in 2015 was struggling, and he's the one that noticed it. He saw her swimming, he saw her performance change, he saw that she wasn't herself, and he pulled her aside and said, hey, when you're ready to talk, let me know. And she ended up getting into therapy and getting help. And then who do we have in the middle here? This is like 5 baseball uniforms ago. Right? So, Zachary, before he won the Cy Young Award, what did he do? He left baseball, right, and he got treatment for his social anxiety disorder. And if you see an interview now, my husband always says, no, what's his issue? Is he autistic or what is it? He looks awkward, he looks uncomfortable, right? But that's anxiety. But has he overcome it enough? Yes, that he's made, I don't know how many bazillions of dollars pitching in baseball. So I think it's really important when you have an athlete that's struggling to remind them that very successful people get help when they have a challenge or a problem.
Well, and you can come back if you take time off to address it. That's the other thing, is I think everybody thinks that when you step away from it, you're totally done, and you don't have to be. So our goal as a clinic was to make a change. Our goal is to destigmatize the mental health issue so it's not so intimidating to people. And I would hope that the kids know that this isn't necessarily going to cost them a future in sports. The athlete needs to know that it's okay to be weak, to lose, to admit that you're not perfect. I think all of us need to be able to do that, and that we can't control everything. And then the most important part is to start a conversation, which is what I had said earlier, is I just think that we need to be able to ask and to do it comfortably. And that's hard for all of us. When we start asking the questions and we did the suicide screening, all of our staff just kind of freaked out. And trying to roll it out throughout the rest of the hospital, it's the same thing. And these are medical providers that deal with awkward questions all the time. So it's okay to be uncomfortable and to try and talk to them or to start that conversation.
And then in terms of being a coach, I think it's really important to remember that you are just so important in the life of the athlete. When I talk to my patients in my office about who do you trust, who are you going to turn to if you have a really rough day, often it's you. So I hear a lot about coaches and how that's the person that I trust. Kids often don't want to talk to their parents, right? So the thing we have to remember is that adolescence is a time of tremendous change and there's a lot of impulsivity that goes on. So if you have a young person who's having suicidal thoughts, they often act very quickly without thinking through the consequences. So I had a young woman in my office recently and I asked her, when did you decide to end your life? Because she had just been hospitalized for a suicide attempt. And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, when did you actually decide? This is so different than the movies, right? The movies make it look like you planned it out forever. she said like 25 seconds before he did it. So often there's this short amount of time, but they may be having intermittent thoughts for a while, and that's where we want to catch them. So how do you set the tone? I think one of the things is if you could start off your season acknowledging that your mental health is just as important as your physical health, and we have to take care of both because there's a serious mind-body connection, I think that's an amazing way to set that tone and that expectation so that your athletes don't feel like they are a loser or they're being weak if they ask for help for something. A lot of my patients who need to take time off, maybe I have patients with anorexia who they cannot go full bore into practice, right? This time of season when track is starting, their heart rate is too low. So we limit them, right, to a couple days a week. If you can be understanding when somebody has limitations like that and support them, they can get back to that full place of recovery and sometimes really, really thrive. So I've got a couple of case examples I'm just going to run through to get you thinking about how young people might present. So I changed details, but these are people that I've worked with. So a 16-year-old who just decides I'm not going to play this year, right? And what you find out is that this is somebody who was really successful before, but they're having a lot of panic attacks, and they don't think they're going to go away. So if you could get this person to get some help, they could actually get back to their sport and enjoy it. Now this is one of my pet peeves, I'm going to be honest, we have a sleep-deprived culture, okay? And I see this in my office constantly, that kids are telling me, well, I'm not doing very well at practice, and then I find out practice ends at 10:30 at night. And I'm like, yeah, because you should be in bed at your age. So I do recommend that kids get enough sleep, and I know that that's really hard. I don't blame, what's that?
I said just his age.
Right. I don't blame the sports as much as I blame the cell phones, right? And the screens that are in the bedroom, that's usually the bigger culprit. And then you have a young person who has really high expectations here, who just can't take a loss at all. And we definitely see that black and white thinking a lot, and we have to help people see that winning isn't the only answer. 17-year-old who is not going to play basketball his senior year because he has Tourette's. So I've worked in our Tourette's Center, and if you're not familiar with tics, kids that have abnormal involuntary movements, maybe they have eye blinking or they make grimacing with their face. This young man was having like the shoulder twitch, so he'd get on the court, and sometimes when they're really focused, it gets worse, right? It's super embarrassing. He was done. And I was like, no, you're not done as your senior year. Like, we can treat this. This is something we can treat. And so with treatment, he was the captain, they went to state, he did fantastic. So if you see that, please talk to them about it. A lot of my patients with tics are really hesitant to talk to their coach. They're afraid their coach is going to think that they're messing around and they're not taking things seriously. Okay, here's a young man who was cut from the team. He wasn't showing up, his grades are falling, he's got a lot of stressors at home, financial stressors, and then I met him after he had crashed his car into a tree. And he told us it was an accident, right? But then you find out that he texted everybody goodbye, and the police say there are no skid marks on the road. So what I want to bring up here is, yes, you have to set limits as a coach. I'm not saying that you should just baby everybody and let someone stay on the team when they have not met expectations. You have to have rules and you have to enforce them. But also, if you're going to cut somebody like this, think about who is in this kid's circle who can support him, right? So maybe you talk to the school guidance counselor or the social worker or the parents or the teacher this kid likes when he's going to be in that isolated place when he's mad at you. 16-year-old softball player who's been isolated from everyone because she's not able to play, and then I meet her in the ICU after she's taken a handful of aspirin. So the other big one I like to talk about is access to medications. When you have a young person who has an injury, they're often prescribed medication for it, and you want to think about the access to it, and the parents need to be thinking about that. So most of us really need to clean out our cabinets because most teenagers have access to handfuls. And some of the over-the-counter medicines are some of the most dangerous. And I've had a lot of parents really gasp in surprise when I tell them that Benadryl was one of the worst overdoses I've ever seen. So Tylenol, ibuprofen, these are things that can be very dangerous. And then here's a tennis player who lost some weight because she had the flu. And somebody called her out and said, hey, you're looking good, you dropped some weight. And guess what? She goes off on left field with that one, and she doesn't stop. So the one thing I would really encourage you to think about when it comes to nutrition is who is providing education to your athletes about nutrition. Because it's good to have education about it. It's good for people to understand how to fuel for their sport. But we definitely have kids that will take a piece of information and twist it in their minds and go with it. So I've had basketball players, volleyball players, wrestlers, soccer players, all in my office telling me that they were told by someone that saturated fat was bad and they should never have saturated fat. So they cut out all animal protein, right? And the dietitian or the trainer did not say it like that, but that's what the kid heard. And so we really need to think about that. If you have people giving any kind of food advice, you want to make sure that they understand eating disorders and the signs and the symptoms of it so they can pick it up and acknowledge it. I mean, these kids go undetected for years. I've had patients who are sitting on the bus eating, nuts and berries while the rest of the team is in eating pizza at Pizza Hut because they just can't tolerate eating that food. And you want to acknowledge that and do something about it. Okay, here's a really busy slide. Just focus on the green squares. That's the loss of life for suicide. And if you unfortunately look towards the top of the screen for young people, you see that suicide is one of the leading causes of death for young people. We're losing more young people to suicide than cancer and heart disease and all those other causes combined down below it. And then if you can say, well, maybe that's a national problem, but unfortunately, it's not something that's just happening on the East Coast or West Coast. So if you see, this is all the states. At the top you have Wyoming, and then you come down and you have Kansas and Missouri, and way down here is the national average. So we are consistently higher than the national average for completed suicides. And then you see suicide rates for young people, and this is in counties in Missouri, but it's very similar in Kansas. And what you see here is that on the far right is the United States. So this is a number per 100,000. So we are consistently higher than the national average in all these counties except for Platte. And it's been increasing. Now here are risk factors. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I think a lot of these are pretty intuitive. And you're going to look up at the screen, and if you have a son or a daughter or people on your team right now, you're going to say, well, yeah, a lot of them have one or two of these, right? They're not doing well in a class, or they're showing up disheveled. Look for a clustering of these symptoms. So when you see somebody who is showing up late for practice every day that didn't used to, they look really tired, their performance is going down, you want to look for a combination of things because that's really where we see a concern. Kids with gender and sexual identity issues are definitely higher risk consistently, so pay attention to that. I've starred self-injury here. Why did I star that? Because if you're working with a young person and you see cuts on them, you want to take that seriously, and you want that person to get connected to help, and I wouldn't take no for an answer. As a psychiatrist, I won't even see those kids by myself. I mandate that they see a psychologist or some type of therapist, because that's something that I can't fix by myself with medication. So I think that that's really critically important, partly because it's a warning sign for a future suicide attempt, and that's what the research tells us, is that if you see cutting, you need to address it. It doesn't mean they're trying to cut to kill themselves, but it's a sign of real significant distress. And they're going to tell you that the cat scratched them, or I've heard all kinds of stories, but just think about if I'm wrong, no big deal. But if I'm right and I missed it and they didn't say anything, that's a big concern. And then the other one is prior suicide attempt. That's a really big concern. So that doesn't mean that they're going to die by suicide, right? Most people that have had suicide attempts go on to recover and live healthy lives, right? But they are at higher risk, and so you want to pay close attention. And I've had patients say, well, the parents say, I don't want the school to know. I don't want the coach to know. And I say, I want them to know. I want them to know because if Johnny doesn't show up for practice, I want somebody to be looking for Johnny harder than they would be looking for the other kids, right? Because we're worried about him. So I wrote an editorial about some suicide prevention stuff a couple years ago, and it was going to be printed in this journal, and they put this picture with it, and I just hated it, okay? I was just so annoyed at the picture, but I didn't want to be picky, because like they're printing my stuff, and so I went home and I just think about it, Shayla, why are you so annoyed? And it came to me, this picture is so stereotypical, right? We have this Caucasian female, and she looks so obviously distressed, and she's looking down, and I thought, goodness gracious, let's promote the stereotype a little more, okay? I've interviewed hundreds of kids after a suicide attempt, and I can tell you they rarely look that bad. Okay, they don't look down and curl up. I do have some kids that do that, and they're one of the more dramatic ones in my office, but this isn't typical. Usually they look at you with a nervous smile, like an average kid, okay? So I said, you guys, can we please have some like average looking kids with neutral expressions, but not like looking down, and can we have some diversity and ethnicity and all this kind of stuff? And they said, oh yes, thank you for your feedback, and then I got busy and I didn't follow up, right? So then I got the publication, and so this is what they chose. I did not get through them, okay? But I think you guys get my point, right? That you cannot tell by looking at these kids. And there is a misperception in our world that you can. Even sometimes in the mental health community. I've had people say, well, I know my patients. Do I have to ask them all the time? Like, well, sometimes they look great today, right? Susie Q comes into my office and she's showing me her prom pictures and everything is awesome. And I really don't want to be negative Nancy and ask her about suicide, but I do it anyway. And then she says, well, last Thursday I broke up with my boyfriend, everything's good now. And I say, well, let's go back to last Thursday. What was going on then? And then I find out she was ready to kill herself. But then he texted her and everything's good. Whoa, okay, like we need to be talking about that. Put away your prom pictures. I'm going to be talking to your parents about how firearms are stored, how medications are stored. We need to be working on her coping, right? So when you want to talk to someone about these things, I think it's really important that you build rapport, right? And so you want to have privacy. And I know as a coach that can be awkward, right? Because you don't necessarily want to take an athlete off by yourself in the corner and talk to them, okay? So if you could have another trainer or somebody else present, I think that's a good idea. Maybe one of their friends, but certainly you don't want to be calling them out in a big group of other athletes, right? Like, good luck. You might as well not ask any questions. How are you doing? Are you struggling with depression? To a big group, like that's not going to go. They're not going to talk to you, right? You have to pretend that you're not in a hurry. Okay, we're all in a hurry. We all have somewhere else to be. You don't have time for this. But if you send them that message that you're in a hurry, I guarantee you they will not talk to you. Now, what if somebody says to you, you say, gosh, you seem like you've been struggling lately. I'm worried about you. What's going on? And then they start telling you all this stuff, and they say, yeah, I was having thoughts of killing myself, and you're like freaking out on the inside, right? Oh my gosh, what do I do with this? You can never go wrong with thanking them. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm so glad you told me. We're gonna get you help. So you gotta remember, we're not asking you to become a psychologist or a social worker or a psychiatrist. We're asking you to help us identify people at risk and then link them to help, right? So you wanna know, how are you going to get this kid help? And one of the things there is you got to figure out whoever you're working with, is there a protocol in place? So if you're working with a school, do they have a counselor? If you're with an organization that has zero protocol, you might want to talk to them about it. Because if you're the one the kid is going to talk to, that's really important. I think about this like CPR, right? If you go back to the 1950s, we didn't have CPR, so if you had cardiac arrest in the field, guess what? Unless a cardiologist was standing next to you, you were gone, right? And now we have all these people, they're first responders. That doesn't mean they're cardiologists, but they can take some steps to intervene, right? Until they get you to the people that know how to manage it better. And that's how I think about this, is if someone is talking with you, you can ask them questions to identify the risk. Now, you don't keep a secret either. And that may sound like, well, you wanted to ask them without everybody being around. Kids are going to talk to you about stuff, and most of them are going to get it when you say, buddy, we got to talk to your mom about this. And they might be mad, right? But let's think through. If they're mad at you, okay, fine, they're mad at you. But if they kill themselves this weekend, and you kept a secret, are you going to feel good about keeping that secret? Well, of course not. If you're not sure, you always want to ask somebody else. Lean on the side of caution. The parents definitely deserve to know about this stuff. So in terms of screening options, I just want to give you a couple of resources if you wanted to learn more about this. The Columbia is something that we use, it's something I use in my office, and they have a free training online. It's geared towards non-mental health people. So on the website they have like the ambulance driver, but they also have like the post office worker or the guy that's out doing construction, and he's asking his friend these questions. These are the questions. You're basically getting at thoughts. Have you had thoughts of wanting to end your life? Have you had plans to do anything? And have you ever done anything? Because those are the things that predict risk. Many kids are going to have had vague thoughts, but no plan, okay? And that's very different. But the kid that says to you, yes, I'm having thoughts of shooting myself with my dad's gun, yeah, I know where it is, it's loaded, it's on the bedside table. That is a very different kid. That is an emergency, and you got to do something about that right away. So that's how we do a safety plan. And Kelly's here from social work, and that is what our social workers do at Children's Mercy in terms of helping people identify social supports in the community. And one of the big things they do is they talk about means restrictions. So do you want to talk about that real quick? How you guys talk with families about that?
Yes, so we always meet with the child and the parent separately to make sure that we can talk openly with both about with the parent, we want to talk about means restrictions. So we don't want to talk in front of the kid in case the kid has thought about using the gun or medication and making efforts to lock those things up.
Yeah. And then in terms of resources, I think that'd be the other thing, is that you guys might identifying somebody's at risk, and maybe they don't have a therapist. So could you talk about that, how to walk a parent through that process?
So it's different in every situation depending on where they live. But when kids have Medicaid, I always refer them to community mental health centers. And then as far as private insurance, almost every insurance plan has a website. So usually I'll sit down with the parent and we'll get on the website and we'll look at behavioral health on the website. I always tell kids that identifying a counselor you like is kind of like trying on a pair of jeans. It usually takes a few or more tries before you find the perfect fit. So just trying to get that buy-in from the kid, talking to them about, what kind of person do you relate to most? Is it a man, a woman, young or old? Just to get that buy-in from them. And then finding those on the websites usually really like about doing it. Also, Psychology Today is a wonderful website. They have therapists and psychologists. You can search by zip code. You can search under insurance plans as well.
Yeah, and I would say the parents often need a lot of support to make it happen, because most teenagers are like, peace out, I don't want that. Like, they're not interested. It's a rare bird that says, oh, bring it on, let's go see a psychologist. Like, they don't want it, right? They're good now, or I didn't mean it. I didn't mean what I said, that was stupid, I'm sorry I said it. So you need to support the parent. Here's resources for teenagers. And then Angie, you had some sports resources you put up here.
Yeah, I mean, see, in the high schools, there's a program of voice men, athletes as leaders, but the NCAA website has a whole section on mental health. And so you might get some ideas from there, or it might be a place to refer people to if they're looking for information.
Yeah.
I was a question about that.
Sure.
I'm curious about your experience, but I know like with youth sports, like parents and kids are used to like going to coaches for like, performance, so like getting faster or better skills. So like if you kind of spun it as we're going to see a mental performance coach, like I mean, are you kind of tricking them? But is that being bad because they're like, oh my gosh, this is my thought? Or can you even like sell it as that, or I don't know if you've experienced that. Or...
Yeah. So I was always taught that you got to be a straight shooter with your patients, and so that's how I roll. Is I'm straightforward with them, but you can roll it into that, because the truth is, if you're anxious or you're depressed, you're not going to perform well, right? And so if that's how they're going to hear it best, then yeah, you can say, I think this would really help you. I think that this is something that a lot of successful people do. And so you can talk about it in that way, but I wouldn't just couch it like, this is a sports enhancement doctor, because that's not how most doctors or psychologists are going to present themselves.
It would be important to talk to the doctor first to make sure that they were okay with you, so that you knew how you could present them the right way, so they didn't get in there and were surprised that other things.
Yeah, and I
misrepresent them.
the other thing I would say is, like, we have a sports psychologist here today. They are rare, right? They are super rare. You do not have a lot of them out there, and it's wonderful to have them, but it's also not necessary for a lot of the problems that we're talking about. I think it's particularly helpful for someone who's having performance anxiety and specific things, but some kids are going to be having a general struggle, and it's impacting their sport, but you don't have to have a psychologist always that is an expert in sport to be helpful. Does that make sense? Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, and it also goes, when you were talking about saying, hey, you're going to see a performance specialist, sometimes that's the route to go, because, and not that it's immediate, obviously, but seeing a performance, like seeing a sports psych, and then we'll refer too. And when I was a professor and I worked with some of the athletes at the university I was at, I was often the stopping point between the athletes and the wellness center, because some of them were going to go directly to the wellness center, but if they were okay with like, oh, okay, a sport person, but obviously if it's immediate, then this isn't going to just stop.
Because in their mind, it's almost like not legitimize it, but then they think, oh, it's related to sports.
Yes.
So they don't see it as a problem.
Because of the stigma, right? Yeah.
And part of the reason why I'm not pushing that route is that we don't have a lot of sports psychologists to refer to in the area. So you don't want to be waiting for months and months to get in with someone if there's another person that could be helpful. Yeah.
I mean, there's what, 3 in the area? 4?
Something like that. Yeah.
Because she's from Vanderpool and I met her today, and that's the 3rd one I think I met. So.
And like Shayla was saying earlier, I think normalizing the idea of counseling in general is, that's always my goal. I counselor in the past. I think it's good for anyone to see one, even if you're not struggling with anything specifically. It's never a bad idea. It's not going to hurt anything.
Are there any good like books, like youth level books where they could read about it first? Like, I don't know. What do you think? I don't know if that exists or.
I'm sure it exists, but I can't think of specifically for athletes.
But a lot of these, there were 3 or 4 books that have been written by athletes in the last few years about their struggles. And so, I don't know if some of the teenagers would want to read those, just because it would be relatable.
That would be cool if it was like even almost like a not a synopsis, but like so something short and simple to have like a summary of each of these athletes
Sure.
talk about what they went through and they read that and it would help them process it.
Right. Well, I think when you read just even those brief articles online with those athletes that have gotten help,
Right.
you know, they talk about it took strength, it took courage for me to go ahead and see the psychologist because I didn't want to do that. I think that's a really important message for them. It also can really help if there's another athlete that you know that they look up to, like an older one that's successful, that's been there, done that. That can be really helpful to connect them as well. Yeah.
Kind of building on what Ben was saying, I played softball in college, and so as a freshman, they made us go see a psychologist on campus just to adjust. And I ended up developing these gifts as a junior, and so I totally lost it. Like, I was like, I'm gonna lose my scholarship. And so it was easy for me then to work with a sports psychologist because I was used to that, it's a safe space. And so I think integrating somebody into your practice setting, and they would just come out to practice. And, you know, then you can say, hey, I want to go talk to you, I had a bad test, or, you know, whatever, but it's that simple integration where it makes it okay and it makes it normal. So starting it early is never a bad thing.
Right. I get right with that, and a big thing to go with that is early intervention is always much better.
Yeah.
So many parents do this watch and wait kind of thing. You know, like, well, I'm hoping this gets better. And if you're a parent, you get it, right? Because we all don't want our kids to have problems. And so it'd be really awesome if this would just go away on its own. And so I've seen parents in the mental health world, you know, that come in after their son or daughter's had an overdose. And I'm kind of like, whoa, you know, even they are struggling to get their kids help. But if you get early intervention, often you can head something off. You know, so like with depression, sometimes just some basic therapy. Many people do not need to see a psychiatrist or don't need medication, you know, so that's another
In that case, or would you wait it out, you know, to see if it gets better before you seek help? No. Maybe
Right.
so.
But then people don't, our society does not think mental health is the same way. It's a totally different.
You have to change that.
right.
Since I DVR most of the stuff I watch on TV, I have a tendency just to fast forward through, you know, commercials and stuff. Have there been any kind of like recent like marketing campaigns where where people would see, kids would see like, I'm an athlete and I've struggled with this and done this and I've gotten help because, you know, whether it's role models or whatever, you know, you can take a look at the people up there and if you see those little snippets in the marketing, to me it would make sense that if a kid is not wanting to talk to anyone and they see that they've got someone that, you know, would be shocking to them, say, hey, listen, I've been through this, I've done that. You know, I don't know if they just might turn the corner for someone and say, hey, I am going to reach out. And I'm sure it's been out there. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of money that's been put in that I just haven't seen it. I never thought about it.
No, I've seen stuff on Twitter. I mean, but it's just because if you follow certain people, you'll see that this so-and-so wrote a book or so, this is a snippet. And I've seen stuff on Fallon and some of the late night stuff where they'll interview someone who's put out a book. But other than that, I haven't seen just as part of commercials. But we also live in a society where people fast forward through commercials.
Right.
So I don't know how many kids would actually watch.
Right, and I think that's an important idea, but I also think as a coach, you probably have more impact.
Yeah.
I think if you talked about an article you read about Michael Phelps or one of these folks, I think that would carry so much weight because they look to you, they want to impress you. So,
And you know, the thing is, in perspective, I love to see movies. I get to see a lot of movies. And the one place where there's a captured audience is that I'm sitting there waiting for the movies.
It would be great.
And I just saw Love, Simon the other day. Incredible movie because it, you know, in a way, it addresses a ton of the stuff that goes on here. And the crowd that was in there was a bunch of high schoolers. So there was something in there that they were, that whether it was, just another great John Hughes movie, or there was something in there that, they walked out of there and it was like, the switch was turned on. They said, hey, I've got stuff going on. And I'm thinking out of the 30 kids that were in there, I got to believe a couple of them that trying to make a difference.
Sure. Some of the school districts are trying that. I know Olathe at their assemblies, they ask the suicide questions. They go through it as a group, and they stress to them numerous times that they need to, if they have any concerns or any of these, they need to talk to somebody, and that they have people, and this is who you can go talk to in school. But I think you're right. I think it's a matter of them seeing it, realizing it is okay, and we'll work on ways we can maybe do that.
I think getting the kids to talk to each other too is not as hard. A lot of these kids are telling their friends, right? They're texting their friends. So if you can get the friends to understand it is not okay to keep a secret about this, I have to tell a trusted adult when this is going on, because this is too much for a kid to have on their shoulders. And I see that too in my office. I see kids who are bearing the burden of their friend who's suicidal. So if you can also make that clear on your team that you want to know about anybody that's struggling. I mean, it's the same thing that Israeli Defense Force did. They cut their suicide rate in half, and a big piece of that was getting people, like you said, psychologists in the middle of the mix, but also they limited access to firearms. They don't take the firearms from them to gas. So.
And do you think for let's just say take for the kids to get through this in those tough years, how far does that tend to go away, or does it keep building through their numbers?
So I think it depends on the situation, but many people have full recovery. So there was a study done in the UK where they studied people who had jumped in front of trains, okay, very potentially lethal suicide attempt, right? And they survived it, and 90% of them were still alive 20 years later. Pretty high percentage of people that were obviously very ill at the time. What we see is that many people fully recover. They may have relapses with depression or anxiety in their future, but I always worry about that when we have someone who's had a lifelong struggle at an auditorium talking to teenagers, right? Because some people are going to have one bout with depression and then they're going to recover and be okay. 17% of high school students in the CDC study tell us that they seriously considered suicide in the last year. And that is astronomically high to me, and 8% say they actually attempted suicide. So those numbers are high, but that doesn't mean they're all going to develop chronic depression. Yeah. Other questions you guys have?
There's something I thought of in terms of like the club setting. Like one of the things that you said made me think of something that worked really well in terms of how to listen to their coaches. A lot of times coaches will give homework. They'll say, "Hey, I want you to go home and read about this like move or like this player," and the kids will do that for their real homework.
Yes.
So like if a coach says and finds an article about microculture, whatever it is, and their sport says your homework is to go home and read this article, and then you have to say anything about why or what it is. Because usually coaches do that. They'll tell you something, and then they want the kid to figure out on their own. So that would be a really good way to do it is for a coach. Sometimes in the season is maybe even right at the beginning and say, go home and read this article, and then, especially if you do like 2 or 3 of them, that would be a pretty good way for the kids to read it, and then you could even, and then what you do with coaches, we do what's called guided discovery. So let's start the next session, you can say, so who read the article? And you say, what did you think? What did you notice? And like, so they say. So that would be a really good way since kids listen to coaches.
Definitely.
And the other thing I thought about in the club setting was, there's a lot of stress and like competition. Like, am I going to be the first team? Am I going to? Because there's a lot of kind of builds. Like, I have to do this in order to do this.
Right.
So when kids are struggling with, well, I don't want to. How is this going to impact my playing time? One of the things that we could do as coaches is if somebody is, let's say they're on the academy team, the top level team, and they're worried about losing their spot. If you can involve that, like, because a lot of clubs will have like first team, second team, third team. You involve that second level coach in the whole conversation and say, maybe this means that you're not going to play with, going tournaments. You're not going to be as involved as your working teams. But you can involve that second team coach so that to say you're still going to get to play with the second team, and we're going to be working to get you back to the first team. So they see a path to recovery in terms of like, I take time off, or I'm not under the stresses of the academy. The goal is still for me to get there, and this is the path. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it very well, but you can involve so they understand the process for fear of, rather than just saying, well, I'm not going to talk about it.
Right. And you're helping them see there's a path.
But then it needs to to be aware too, because I think sometimes these kids have so much pressure put on by their parents. You know, well, why aren't you playing on the first team? And so they need to be aware that this is temporary, we have a goal.
And you look at it from the coach of the second team, what second team coach wouldn't love to get a star player on the team? Like, yeah, I'll take him. And then it would actually help them, because a lot of times, if you're at one level and you start playing at the lower level, they'll actually naturally be more successful, they'll have more confidence, and they'll do better. And maybe that's what they need, is to spend a season playing at a lower level to get them back feeling good, and then naturally move back up. So that transition between coaches and teams, I think it helps to be driven. I guess that was the third thing I thought about was some of these things that helps if it would be like a club level resource. So like who to refer to this protocol. If you have a club that has a person, like I don't know who would be, that's maybe the challenge, because you don't really have like you have they have different roles in a club. And I'm not sure where this would fit, because it's like maybe like an age group coordinator, because the director of coaching is usually in charge of more of like technical development. So a lot of clubs don't really have a position that would be, who do I talk to about this, who's my referral? So that would be a good thing for clubs to do, is to have a person who is in charge of that for the club. So coaches have a resource. You know, maybe they can't say, well, go talk to this doctor, but you refer to this one
Social worker.
Sounds like you need a social worker.
The ATCs, do you hear any of the clubs that work with athletic trainers other than during tournaments?
Yeah, I mean, we've got support, but, if they're there, the athletic trainer is sometimes a gateway to having those conversations and getting them to where it goes.
Yeah, and they might have access to some resources too for the gym. Because there's a lot of those tournaments are set up.
A lot of times it depends on your insurance, and everybody's insurance is different. So I hate it when someone says to me, well, who should I go to? I'm like, show me the list from your insurance, and I'll tell you who will be good on the list, because everybody's got different insurance. So I think when you have a good social worker, they can not only help do an assessment, right, to determine acuity, because most kids are not going to need to be hospitalized, but if they do need to be, you don't want to miss that. And then they can also help with, here's how you get resources, and here's how you navigate the system, and here's what you do if they didn't call you back, the whole thing.
Social workers are available at schools, right? You may have them on your team. Most coaches know when they have medical people that are parents. Oh, why wouldn't you know if you have social workers that happen to be parents as well?
Well, and your kids are going to play, with their schools too, so they're always going to be counselors.
Yeah, right. I mean, go to school and want to be the first line of defense.
And a lot of times, if I am concerned that the family may not follow through on identifying a counselor, I'll sit down and call them together. That way they at least have the appointment and more likely to follow.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were going to touch on if someone is acutely suicidal.
What?
Okay. So when we do see that, or if I talk to someone on the phone and say, my child has a plan, has access to whatever means, I always tell them to go to the emergency room right away. And Children's Mercy has a great process, but any emergency room should be able to address that. That's the start.
Well, we don't want to scare you. That's not typical. Really, I mean, it's a tiny fraction of the kids that we've screened that actually need to go to inpatient psychiatric care. Most of them, if you ask these questions earlier before they're in crisis, you get to catch it earlier, and so they get to go home. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys.